Welcome to our latest Book Reporter Talks to interview. Our guest today is Miranda Cowley Heller, whose book, The Paper Palace, was, hold on for this, folks, an instant New York Times #1 bestseller, and at the time of this interview has been on the list solidly for 5 weeks. It's a Reese Witherspoon Book Club selection, a B&M Book Club pick, and yes, a Book Reporter Bets On selection as well. I read The Paper Palace in 24 hours, starting poolside, where I have this lounge chair that's under a tent that my husband teases like my Cleopatra chair. And I sit under there because it's really convenient because it's not too much in the sun. If it's hot, and if it rains, I can keep reading. And as I started reading this book, it started to pour rain, and I posted and said, I'm on page 6. It's really good. I don't have to move. So this is perfect. So I read on, and I actually said one more chapter at 1 a.m. and one more chapter at 2 a.m. and then went to sleep and finished immediately in the morning. And that to me is a sign of a really terrific book. So with that, welcome, Miranda. You can tell I'm really happy to have you here.
Hi, Carol. I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm so glad that you kept reading.
Yeah, I kept right on reading. In the morning, I was like, no, we're not doing anything. I have to finish the book. So let's start with the setting, because setting and place are so well drawn in this book. I felt like I was there. And I feel like it's a bit of a love letter to a very special place. So let's talk about where the Paper Palace is set and how the place got its name, because I love it.
It's set on the outer Cape, Cape Cod. And it's a place that I spent my childhood, so very special to me, and very important that for me, made it a sort of character in the book, one of the characters. I grew up, both my parents are artists, and I grew up spending all summer there, it's a very wild landscape. Mm-hmm. The further out you go, and the backwoods where this is set, is all dirt roads. It's very easy to get lost. People can't really find their way in. Lots of freshwater ponds right on the edge of these cliffs that go down to the fresh Atlantic. And for me, the importance of place in my life was really something I wanted to translate into this character, and the indelibility of place, how it sort of both surrounds and shapes and grounds us in all those ways. And for Elle, the Paper Palace, this rundown camp on the side of a freshwater pond, is her place. And the backwoods, the place that she grew up, and the place that formed her both in happy ways and traumatic ways. And I think also I wanted also to sort of infuse her and with elements of place. So when she's in turmoil, there's a storm. She wakes up to the reality of what she's done on a cold water swim. The hot sex takes place in the heat. And Elle Bishop is this character who, in the very first moment of the novel, basically she's taking a swim, and she gets panicked, and she swims back to the safety of the shallows where she can see the sandy bottom. But she also loves the thrill and the heartbeat, and that's who she is. She's not one thing or the other. She's divided in that way. And I think from the very beginning, that's who this character is.
Yeah, and you're completely there. And it's not the Cape I know with the sandy beaches or even the rocky beaches. Right. Why did I not know there were ponds on the Cape? I mean, what have I been missing?
Keep it secret.
Yeah, big secret, really big secret. I mean, it's me saying there's a little pond on the Jersey Shore, and people go, really? There's a pond down there? Tell me where it is. No. So I love that this gathering place for this Bishop family, it's not palatial, it's rather shabby chic and utilitarian. And I could see it. And it was the purpose not to make it look. You could have put this character in some very stuffy environment where there were people that were making the meals and everything for them. But instead, they're filled with people who are kept in shape and actually were plugging the holes all day long. That character of the setting, I thought, was so important to the story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Paper Palace, as it is ironically called, is called the Paper Palace because her grandfather, who's had a house on this freshwater pond, built it many, many years ago as a way of making some extra income because he didn't have enough money, and he ran out of money building it. And so it's little cabins. And so he ended up building the entire inside out of something called homicide, which is kind of cardboard made of pressed paper. And by the end of the novel, I hope the reader understands the metaphor of that within Elle, that she takes a journey over the course of the novel to a sort of feeling of strength and a feeling of wholeness, and all these little teeny bits of paper that have been crushed together, like the paper palace, are still standing and strong, regardless of what, you know, the storms that she has been through in her life. And so that was very important to me. I would also just quickly say that these are people who they're had wealth. I mean, they're definitely sort of Upper West Side New Yorker types of people, you know, whatever. They still feel very entitled, let's say, but they're artists. They're sort of preppy bohemians, let's put it that way.
Right.
But set them in, you know, with a cook would be, you know, that's not who they are, right? These are people who, you know, were swimming naked in the 70s.
Right. And they pride themselves, they don't have to cook with them. They pride themselves, they're doing it all on their own. They wouldn't have the money to do that anyway. They wouldn't, you know, these are book editors and journalists and, you know, that kind of, so yeah. They said we're going to the Cape, and then no one really knows. No. Yeah. And then there are the characters. And I'm going to read this because Elle is now in her 50s. She spent every summer here at the Cape with her family. And the book opens with one of the most intense starts that I've read. By the third page, and I went back and looked at this, the third page, we know that as Elle has had sex for the first time with her childhood friend, Jonas, the night before. And as this happened, Elle's husband of many years, Peter, and her 3 children were back inside the house eating dinner alongside her mother and Jonas's wife. And to me, this is a little bit like the passion of this scene is like she's losing her virginity in some backwards way, where after the marriage and the children, she's like losing her virginity for the first time with this guy that she's like loved for years. And for there, we had backwards and ahead, but it's this really explosive start to snap up readers. Like I was snapped up like right in the beginning of, wait, what just happened? Is that what you intended in that? It's like a cold open. If you're watching a television show, there's that cold open for you.
I guess what I intended was the splash of water, the cold water. I mean, that not so much cold open, but to just go for it, you know? And I think I would just clarify, her children aren't in the house. That would maybe have taken it a little bit too far. Her children are asleep in their cabins.
Oh yeah, they're asleep in their cabins, okay.
And it's in the middle of a dinner party. So there's other guests there. But yeah, and I think one of the things was that there is this emotional mystery that runs through the novel, which is she's been in love with Jonas. He's her best friend sort of for 30, 40 years sort of thing, right? So they were best friends since childhood and probably would have gotten married if something terrible hadn't happened in their childhood that prevented that. And so there's this sort of why now? And that's the question I started with. Let's go backwards. Let's start with the thing. Let's start with her jumping off the cliff, so to speak. And then let's go backward and find out what led her to this cliff, why she's there at the precipice now. And then we see her, and then she's jumped. So then we follow it with, so by the end of the novel, I hope, understand why she did this thing. But that's a kind of mystery. And also it's important that her husband, Peter, who's British and wonderful, she has a great marriage. It's not like Elle has an unhappy marriage. She loves her kids. She's very happily married. And so she ends up having done this thing. And now she has 24 hours to make a choice, because there's no way Jonas could ever be an affair, right? That's just not a possibility. So she knows she has to make a choice between these 2 men who she loves in very different but very equal ways. And so there's no bad choice. And so that means there's no good choice. And so, you know, what do you do when your entire life depends on something and there's absolutely no way you can figure out which direction to go? And that's kind of the soup that she's swimming in over the course of the novel.
Yeah, and we're just going to be along for the ride to figure out what happens with her, because we don't know what's happened in the past. So we know something's happened, we don't know. And the secrets, there are many of them. We watch how those secrets come to bear on everyone. Did you know most of what the secrets were going to be when you started writing? Like, did you say? No, okay.
I didn't know any. it was a really interesting writing experience because, well, it's my first novel, but I had no outline. I didn't really know what it was going to be other than this structure and this idea that I had about telling a woman's life in 2 different time frames. They're not flashbacks. It's 50 years and it's 24 hours.
Mhm.
And it's 2 lives, but in the 24 hours, you also see the cycle of her life and in the 50 years. And so I had no idea. And what happened was I just almost closed my eyes and followed her
Mhm.
and followed instinct. It was really strange. I mean, I didn't know any of the big things that were going to happen until they happened.
Until
And
they just unfolded. Yeah.
so fun. I mean, not fun. It was upsetting actually, because then now you're
No, until they just unfolded in front of you. Yeah, it's like, there it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because I also think it was interesting to be led by somebody instead of to direct them.
Mhm.
I think you know, sort of in terms of not knowing I never decided what she was going to choose, who she was going to choose.
Mhm.
That didn't come until the penultimate page
Mhm.
of the novel.
Wow. So you didn't know what's going on. So she's looking at the choices she's made and what's influenced them. Her parents are divorced. Her dad's been married multiple times. Her mom remarried and not only brought the stepfather into her life, but also his children, who had a profound impact on her. And I feel like she's having this moment that I'm having this moment of what makes me happy, what brings me joy, what brings me contentment. Am I right on that? Is that what she's looking for as well?
No, I mean, it's not that you're wrong, but
No.
I think what she has been looking for or didn't know she would ever find is redemption. And without wanting to give away any clues, as it were, she does find that at the toward the very end of the novel, of the 50 years, in fact. And it gives her permission to step outside that back door.
Mhm.
But she's in agony. It's not, you know, she's in agony over this. She has a very happy life. She
Mhm.
loves her husband. She loves Jonas. And she's really going through a lot on that day. I think in the end, what it's more about than sort of finding joy is kind of a thing we all struggle with, which is, you know, particularly when you get to a certain age, but I think in general is, you know, who do I want to be in the end of my life? What can I live with my regrets? Was there a different path I could have taken? And would that path because of course, every choice we make leads to a different direction, right?
Mhm.
And specifically in her case. And so I think this is about her journey and also about the way choices, I think, are made.
Mhm.
Huge ones and little ones, and how they're inherited as well from the things our parents did. And so for me, I think we all have these moments in our lives where we're asking really deeper questions, particularly during this time of COVID.
Mhm.
A lot of us have been alone or inside, and there's a lot of tragedy around us. And you sort of look at your life and take stock. And I think it's more that than sort of the Marie Kondo of it all.
Yeah, exactly. I think that many, or perhaps most women in their 40s or 50s, if they're actually honest with themselves, will sit there and say what might have been as well as what is. I think everybody does this moment. And I don't think you do it in your 20s. I don't think you do it in your early 30s. I think it's in your 40s and your 50s. It's when a lot of marriages either fall apart or stay together. And people may take a walk away from each other and come back, or they may just keep on walking. And we notice this because a lot of my kids' friends that were in high school, the parents are divorced now. And it's like they stayed for the kids. And now it's like, you know, what do I want to do? With that, Elle, I feel like she's doing all the right things with her children, her marriage, and she's wondering what could be. Like she's wondering what could be. And that's where I think that I'm really picking up on this book is like, where am I now and what am I doing? And did I let it slip away? Did I let it slip away?
Yeah, and I do think that that's sort of universal. And I think with women particularly, perhaps, you know, or we feel, some of us in the 40s, that there's going to be a sort of, sounds going to be so horrible, a sort of sell by date, which is not true. But you know, like men can go on and have young women and children, but for us, you're approaching menopause, you're approaching whatever that is. And so it's kind of, oh, this, if I'm going to go, I should jump now. And then if you don't jump, and then you stay. And then, but I also, so for me, I really wanted to create a character in Elle who was really truthful to what it's like to be a woman of 50, and nothing simple about that, but also she is a sexual creature. She is attractive and attracted. She's what women in their 50s actually are, which is, we're not, shutting down at all.
No.
I hope not.
No, and for a long time though, when people hit their 50s, it was like this, like turn it off kind of moment. And it's not now. I think people are realizing this is like this is a great end. This is the other part of your life. Children are older. This is like, you can go on and do your thing. You don't have to come home for dinner every night and worry about it quite the same way. It's just a different moment. Yeah. But then we've got Wallace, who's Elle's mother, who's this formidable creature. And she too has been subjected to her own mother's marital choices, many of which were not good. And they started the waves of uncertainty and lack of trust for this family. I don't see a lot of warmth in Wallace. I love the way it's like, I'm going to take a swim. We should do this. We should do that. But I feel like you had a ton of fun writing her. And am I right about that?
Oh, I love that. She was the most fun character to write because, she's just outrageous in so many ways. But she's also, it's interesting because she's there, they go and stay with her every summer. And so, and I think she too takes a journey over the course of the novel, so that when you get to that very last scene, again, which we can't really talk about,
right?
Where she talks about swims you don't regret or swims you do regret. She too, she allows herself some warmth. I think with Wallace, to your point of things we inherit and the sort of Wallace's childhood, she comes from a sort of legacy. There's her mother, Nanette, then there's Wallace, and then there's Elle. And all of them in different ways have experienced trauma. And it's impacted them, I think, in different ways. And that's what I think is very, very interesting. The things that we inherit. Wallace in particular, her mother goes through, from a particular time where she has to be completely reliant. She has no money for a variety of reasons. And so she kind of has to stick with her man, side with the man, because she can't survive otherwise. And that comes out of a sort of traumatic childhood, which, and then because of her choice, that impacts Wallace, of course. And Wallace, when she goes through her own trauma, becomes a person whose strength is, I think, in not putting importance on things, at least outwardly. She's got a shell. Because of who Wallace has become, it asks the question, if Wallace's trauma hadn't happened and she hadn't had that shift in character and point of view and behavior, when Elle went through her own trauma, would she have gone to her mother? Would they have had a different relationship? Would Elle's life have had a completely different outcome? And, I think what I was more interested in with the Paper Palace was, and in general, is asking questions rather than answering them. So, because they're the things that interest me, but I don't know that any of us have the answers. But I certainly think that there is a universal experience to ask those kinds of questions, and also to feel resentful for the things you've inherited, or, angry at your parents for things, or whatever it is, so that sort of the what ifs really have always interested me too.
Well, Wallace always said, like, this is the way it is. This is the way it's done. This is how we eat breakfast. This is how we set out the placemats. Go back and get the bug spray. We're going to the party. Do we have everything? And it must be the way it was before. Like, nothing new can be introduced to the story. It just was this. And I think Elle's also looking that I don't want to become Wallace. Like, I don't want to be this with my children. I don't want to just say, go to your beds. She doesn't want to be her mother. And I think that that's rolling through her head while she's sitting here as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the choices and the things we inherit and the ways we were raised can either sadly continue in a cycle, or it can make you break the cycle completely, and I think that happens as often as not. Children like I did come from families of a lot of divorce. You want to stay married, or maybe, but everybody's different. But I think that that's one potential resolution to that. To the point of which I love that you mentioned about Wallace and her particular ways. I think, somebody asked me about the most valuable lesson my mother taught me, and the metaphor of what she taught me actually goes through the book. And my mother is not Wallace and nothing like Wallace, thank God. But my mother believes in setting a table so that what's left behind, so the still life after the dinner, is as beautiful as the table before the dinner. And that's like so you set the table, you have to learn how to set a table so that the mess is equally beautiful in its own way. And I think that metaphor really does, for me, run out, unconsciously, but really ended up running throughout the entire novel,
I love that. I love that.
So
I love that. That's
why it starts with the still life of an unclear table. I think I wasn't really thinking about it. And yet that's sort of what, the mess is as beautiful as the beginning.
I love that. I'm going to think about that when I set a table. I really am going to think about that because, a couple of years ago, I realized that the silver was always in a safe and we were never using the silver. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. We love to entertain. We love to set a table. Why are we not using the good stuff? Like, why are we saving it for like 5 days of the year? And I made a change so we do that more. And people come over and they're like this. And I'm like, no, but it sets a tone. And I like the tone. And I think that's,
No, yes. And also, and it is, if you have beautiful bowls of fruit or beautiful old plates or whatever it is that, if you left that table and you were too tired to clean up the mess and you came back up in the morning, a painter could paint it.
Yes.
And I think that's part of it, because my stepfather was a painter who raised me, and my mother was very visual. But that's an idea as well, a really interesting idea to me.
Yeah, it's always like, every time we have dinner, I have 2 boys and husband, and it's like, it's only the men in the house with me. So every once in a while I'm sitting there like, wait, no, we have to set the table. We have to put all this stuff out. And they look at me and I'm like, no, this is the way we do it. That's the way it is. Yeah. And I said, I think you quite get it, but this is the way it's going to be, and if I'm not home, even the placemats don't make it to the table. And I'm like, really? The placemats? No, why not?
Why not? And also, what is it about not knowing which side a fork and a knife go on still? I mean, I have 2 boys too, and they're definitely old enough to have sat down to every meal at the table and know exactly what side a fork goes on. Right. And if I say, well, what difference does it make, Mom? Like, why are you're so neurotic? And I'm like, yeah, but it's nice to know that the fork is going to be there when you go to pick it up. I don't know. You're not wrong, but anyway.
Well, I also find it amusing that we always have put the water in the water glasses, and it is always like, what pitcher to use? And I'm like, it's the same thing we do every holiday. And why is it not just instinctual? Just go put the water in the glasses on the table. Like, why am I asking this again? So yes, I totally get those kinds of moments and explaining them and whatever. And I love the story takes place over 24 hours and 50 years. And it's a really unusual construct and a way to tell a story. But at the same time, I loved moving back and forth to see how the plot rolled together and how the backstory came together. Was that always the structure of the book? Were you always setting it up this way? Because it's so terrific.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was the one thing I really started with, actually, in terms of my idea for the book, which, funnily enough, came from a couple of things, but particularly from a quote by John Lennon, "Life is what happens when you're making other plans," that was very influential to me when I was a teenager. And, I kept thinking, I would make these lists, of what I was, what I needed to do to become a perfect person. Practice the flute more, and there's sort of a joke actually in the novel, because one of the things that was constantly on my list was read Middlemarch. And by the way, I'm reading it now. So
there you go. Like that box.
Finally, after all these years. Anyway, but and of course, just life goes on and you live your life and all of these things are happening. And I got to my 40s, sort of, as you said, that's that moment sometimes when you kind of say, what's the life I've led? Was it intentional? Is it what I wanted? And all these things. And I thought, I'm still doing that. I'm still planning ahead for what it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a weird way, that really became, I thought, well, how do you tell that story? How do you do that story of how we live our lives, or how I had? And so to me, it was that, in a way, that the 24 hours in which Elle has finally, she's spent her whole life thinking, fantasizing in a way about Jonas. And now it's right there. So the 24 hours is the life she's been leading in her head. The 50 years is the actual life that she's led. And so it's sort of the two lives of this one woman, and then that meet at the end and find a way to join up at the end of the novel.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it's a completely different book, but Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, that's out this summer, takes place in a day, and also the backstory of everything that's going on. And I thought, two big books of the summer, the two biggest books of the summer, written, and they're very, very different books. I'm not saying that they're the same at all, but you're up against this day where the clock is ticking, and the clock is ticking as well. And I just find that, wonderful. So Jonas is weaving his way in and out of Elle's life. Like, it's like he's there for these big and little important moments. He's there for some real big ones, but he's also there for the little day-to-day stuff. He's a little bit younger than she is, but he also doesn't have the burden of the day-to-day of her life like Peter did. It's just pure desire. And that's kind of like, that makes him more attractive to her. I feel like she's never had to pick up his socks. She's never had to wonder what living with him was like, except in the most perfect way that's in her head. And I was thinking of that a lot as well. True that, like, she's seeing him in a different way as well, and what he's bringing to her.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I think there's a line in the novel about how toilet paper can lead to World War III, and she knows that. She sort of says, Jonas is what could have been. Jonas is animal, Peter is mineral, and I need a rock. So she does understand the sort of fantasy of him. I think, though, the difference is that there's a distance she has from both men. Mm-hmm. And it's for the same reason, but different reasons. Mm-hmm. So Jonas knows the truth about Elle's life, and she carries a lie in her life. And it's really heavy to carry a lie. And that's why she can't be with him. Peter doesn't know. And that's the one thing that separates her from him. Mm-hmm. Is this lie in both directions with both men is very determining for her. I think with Peter, she knows he would forgive her. That's why she can't tell him, because she doesn't want to be forgiven. She can't forgive herself. With Jonas, again, he has forgiven it in her. And that, again, there's push away on both sides, is what I'm saying, from the sort of the sins of her past, as it were.
Yeah, it's like, this is just to see this, like, going back and forth of, I know this, but he knows that. I did this, how do I really feel? Your husband's British, like Peter. Do they share any of the same traits? Like, do they make eggs the same way? Do they cook the same way?
Yes. I would say that eggs, well, no, actually, no, not eggs. His sisters make egg like that. They share smoking.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And wit. Other than that, they are very, very different people. My husband's very funny and very clever, but he's of a totally different type of Englishman than Peter, and is a very different husband, very different father. So no, it's definitely, I mean, Peter is much more like many other, British men I know, or sort of pieces of people. Yeah, the eggs is a bête noire for me, but I think I trained him to stop doing that sometime in the early 80s or whatever.
Yeah, we're not going to make it in the saucepans. Like, this is just not what we're going to do. It's not going to happen. But the smoking came up like so often. Peter was always lighting a cigarette. He was always lighting a cigarette, and I was like, okay, maybe he's going to be dead of cancer by the end of the book. You know what I mean? Because he was always smoking, and she was never seeming to try to stop him from doing that either. It wasn't like, don't do this or whatever. And it was smoking in the house or whatever. And it was something that I definitely saw I was thinking, my gosh, a film of this these days, how would you do the cigarettes? You know?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because she says at the beginning of the novel that she hates it.
Mhm.
And she all for years she tried to make him stop, but that she realized it's like trying, I think she says, to make, you know, a pig fly, or that's, I can't remember what the line is.
Yeah.
And it's just not going to happen. And so, you know, this is his choice, by the way.
Mhm.
And so she has to kind of let him make his own choices. And I suppose that was the one personal bit, because it's very hard for me too to watch that and live with that. Although
Yeah.
smoking in the house is definitely verboten, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like, you know, ashtrays everywhere. And here we go. I was really amused when her sister's boyfriend, or perhaps it was her husband at that point, came to the paper palace and stayed for like one night and then invented like a reason to leave. I mean, I was just cracking up. And it was one of those brilliant little scenes that said a lot about him, them, and how he was just not going to fit in. He wasn't going to make the cut, and he wasn't going to pretend about it anymore. And I loved Wallace's reaction was something like, well, his loss, like he's just not fitting in here. And I felt like that was an incredibly fun scene to write, of like, I'm out of here, and the excuses that he's making. And then she's like, you want to go to a Broadway play instead of being here? Like, why would you want to do that?
It's such a tourist thing. Yeah. I mean, that's where writing Wallace was so much fun. I mean, in that thing when he comes and she says, you know, he's from Southern California, and she says, it's amazing, you know, Manhattan and beach are two of the most fantastic things in the world, and you put them together and all you have is mediocrity. And she says that to him, you know, it's she's just so rude. And I loved that about her.
So he goes back and goes, why am I here? Like, I'm looking at this room. I could be in this fabulous hotel. What am I doing at this campsite with this family? Like, why am I doing? And
Right,
he's just like, I'm gone. Like, I'm just not going. I can't even figure out how to make this work. I just felt like he was like, I just can't do this. I can't even.
And also, and then Anna, who's we haven't talked about, but Elle's amazing, wonderful sister.
Sure.
You know, she says, well, it's my fault that he, you know, I forgot to tell him that Paper Palace was ironic. So, you know, poor guy.
And she and her sister, their relationship changes as sisters' relationships do shift during the book. And we won't even talk about like where this penultimate scene happens with the sister as well. But there's all those moments of Elle's also lost a lot of things around her. And there's times where there's close, there's times when they're apart, but she always knows if she rang her, she'd be there, I think, pretty much, you know?
Yeah. And I think ultimately, as you know, many sisters experience, you know, your older sister can be a, you know, or but in general, but maybe, but a bully, you know, or feel that way. And then the older you get, the more the exact same age you are. I think particularly, and those relationships do change, and because they go through divorce and they're kind of these, you know, little girls together, who respond differently, but have this shared experience, it really creates a very deep bond between them. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Anna's a little bit further out there. It's, you know, Elle's conforming a little bit more to the rules, but by the same token, it's like, well, she's the one constant. Like when dad or mom or everyone picks up and leaves, this is who I've got. And this is the one I've got. It's my anchor. It's my anchor in a lot of ways. And when that anchor shifts, we'll just say that somewhere during the book, that's a big shift for Elle as well. That's a big look at.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And a kind of taking stock.
Yeah. And I'd say it's like she's exploring living her one shot, because she's seen, like, you know, what can happen, like, you know, this one shot. Books written in first person, was it always in that voice, or did that edit come over time? Was it always going to be, I'm in her head?
Always in that voice. I think it couldn't be told any other way, because the 50 years are not flashbacks, but told from that point of view at that time. It was very important to me to have Elle's different voices, but always, you know, so she's in the moment. She's not remembering something from this moment. And so I didn't really see any other way to tell that. I think otherwise it would have felt like flashbacks. You know, how do you distinguish that otherwise? How do you personalize the difference between a life and a day?
Well, you know, there's so many authors I'm talking to that they'll say, well, this was written in the third person. This was written a totally different way. And I threw out 35,000 words because I realized I was headed in the wrong direction. Like, it was just not. And when you nail it from the beginning, the story sometimes feels more cohesive. There's times where books have been edited so much that I can tell. And I feel like it's gone through like 6 revisions, and the 7th, maybe somebody should have looked at to make sure it all like flowed, because it's not like completely there anymore. I just find that's, kind of interesting. And
yeah, it is interesting. And I think, everybody writes differently. And that was one of the things that took me a long time to kind of come to learn was, oh, I kept thinking, well, I'm not a real writer because, real writers do it this way. And then I suddenly went, oh no, everybody does it differently. And it really doesn't matter how you get there. It just matters that you get there, right? So.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've talked to Kristen Hannah a lot. She's a good friend, and we work with her a lot on projects. And she said to me that she threw out, I think it was 35,000 words of The Four Winds. And her last book, she actually wrote 3 times. It came from 3 different points of view. And finally, she wrote it first as a thriller, second from the boy's point of view, and then realized it had to be from the girl's point of view. And to go through that, to really feel like you're writing a book, I find it so interesting, because a lot of times people are headed in the wrong direction. I think your direction was dead on right from the beginning, because it'd been thought before you started. But there are many times where people say, I just realized I wasn't doing the right thing. The character wasn't right. It didn't feel right. Whereas I feel like you knew what you wanted to do with her from the beginning, and it was shaping the rest of the story that happened around it. That's what I felt.
I mean, I think to a certain extent that's true in terms of kind of the larger piece, the larger questions that I wanted to raise. But I will also say that I write into the dark. I like the blank page. I have absolutely no idea what's going to come out that day. I don't have any outline. And I think for me, I don't go backwards. I mean, ultimately, of course, you have to go backwards and make sure it's written well, exactly how you want it, or add in or flesh out things. But I didn't go backwards until I got to the end, as it were. And I needed, and then there were certain things that changed, but not that much. And I think that's part of sort of a different, like writing from a dreamier place, let's say. The reason I didn't I always wanted to write a novel, but I was really too frontal lobe as a person. And so I would be like up there judging this little, super ego going, oh, is that any good? Are you sure that's good? And I had to really learn to kind of close my eyes and just go, okay, just see what happens. And if it's terrible, it'll be terrible. And then the next day, maybe there's a little something to take from it. And, at that, and in any event. So yeah, I feel like she took over for me.
She took over, she was driving the bus. It's also told in 4 parts. We've got Elle, Jonas, Peter, and the summer. And was that something that was done earlier in the game? Was that done later on? Because I went back and I looked at it last night. I didn't even notice that I was reading, because I was just, page turning, literally.
In terms of the book, the different books, they were always going to be that. I think that comes from a musical background, actually. I grew up, my mother's an opera singer, and I grew up as a musician. And I do think in terms of movements and sort of sonatas, and I write that way. I can feel like, oh, I need to come to a stop. Oh, I need to kind of go back. Oh, it needs to crescendo or whatever. That sounds, as I'm saying it, incredibly obnoxious, I feel like.
I get it.
That's not what I mean. What I mean is that I knew that when I came to the end of the piece, I was at the end of that piece. And the next piece, the Jonas piece, is radically different in tone and in storytelling from book 1. And each of the books is very, very different in terms of structure and tone. And so that is something, I think that's sort of how it started. But I also wanted to try to replicate in the day, in one day, and then in 50 years, sort of the movements of passion and life. And that's sort of a glue, I think, was that, when you wake up after having this affair, it's like everything's super passionate and hot and this and steamy. And there's basically no more sex, it's very propulsive. And then you get into the next phase of it. And, the next phase, and as you say, then it's, toilet paper and, you're
doing the dishes.
Table or whatever, doing the dishes. And so the sort of quotidianness. And so I wanted to kind of follow those tones as well. So that, those things were in my head, but not anything specific otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like when we flip back to when she first met Jonas, and she has this very strong memory of that, and seeing him again and seeing him at these different points in her life, seeing him in New York, seeing him all these places. And he's growing and moving, and she is, and they're sometimes like this and sometimes they're like that, but there's something that always held them like this. And I felt that that was the important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, I keep telling my friends to call me when they get to the ending. I said, just call me. And I'm not going to tell everybody why I'm saying that, but I'm saying, call me when they get to the ending. Did you always know the ending? Did you always know what was going to happen?
I not only did I not know, I think maybe I mentioned earlier, I didn't decide until, well, actually, Elle decided. I would have done something different. And it was kind of upsetting when I realized. And I knew I couldn't decide as the person writing the book, because otherwise it would be obvious in some unconscious way. And so I just didn't know. And she goes back and forth, all day long in a way. And as one does. And, I thought it was going to be one thing on the second to last page of the book. And then suddenly it was something else. And so there was absolutely, that was the only way I could sort of hope to cleave to the way we actually do make decisions. It's not a list. There's the A and B lists. We might make them, and then we just jump in another direction because of some little thing, or I don't know, a phrase that comes up or a memory that hits, and you just suddenly do the opposite. And I think that to me was an important piece of the very end. Yeah.
And it's where we end, where we begin. It was really, really interesting. So how close is the book that we're reading now to the manuscript that you turned in? Like, did you do a lot with your editor along the way, or are we pretty close?
No, we did. I mean, both. So I love my editor, by the way. She's Sarah McGrath, amazing. And I also worked with a mentor, Mark Sarvis, who I did my first novel writing workshop with, a long time ago in Los Angeles at UCLA. And he's a novelist too, and amazing. And he helped me, and the reading group I was in, the little writing group rather, that sort of helped me question myself. And then in terms of the editing process with Sarah, she had a lot of thoughts and a lot of notes, and some I agreed with and some I didn't. And we kind of hashed through a lot. And then at the end, the ones that there were certain things where I felt very, very strongly, and, we would battle it out. But at the end of the day, what she really did for me was, again, ask questions and push me. If somebody says, I don't get this, they may say, oh, here's a potential answer. Well, we all know that doesn't mean to do that, literally. It means, how do I interpret that note from her? How do I find a way to tell that story? And so I think what the book what was there didn't change that much. It's what was added. There was a lot of stuff just that she correctly wanted me to really enrich, and character work that she felt was needed. And it was, I think, a much better book after that process. But it wasn't one of those kind of things where with your editor, you're tearing stuff apart. I don't think we tore anything apart. I think we just made it longer. No, better. I think we just made it better.
Yeah. And sometimes you see something so clear in the paper because it's like, oh, I just totally get this. And she's like, well, wait a second. If we explain it a little bit more to the reader, it's going to become a much stronger story. It's going to move it along for them. And sometimes it's just, the story's got to go this way. It's got to just go this way to be a little bit brisker, or you got to slow down the pace and explain this a little bit more. And I think that I just feel that the book, I could see you were really inside these people's heads so much. And I was inside the story so much. I could see that somebody every once in a while would have to say, whoa, 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 whoa. You see this, they completely see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also very, I will say guilty of, although it's just what I do, is that I do write. I am interested in the unsaid. I'm never going to be that person who's, really explaining what's going on. I think that, I hope, and I know that readers bring their own, they own a book themselves, and are smart, right? And, and so to have to try to explain or do the sort of, interiority, as they call it, with the process, right? I'm like, if I'm not getting that out there in a natural way, then I've failed at something. And clearly I did in places where Sarah would go, I don't get that. And so I would really go back and go, okay, makes sense. How do I bring Wallace's, how do I bring Peter's, any Elle's, everybody's sort of internal mechanics and feelings without it being on the nose, without, it's always for me, show me, don't tell me, right?
Yeah. And it's because I felt the place. I felt like I've been there. I feel like, I don't swim in, let's say, I won't swim in the ocean. I can swim in pools. I swam in a pond when we were in the Hamptons. I was very surprised because I couldn't see the bottom, and I was totally comfortable with this. But when I was there, I felt like I wanted to be in that pond. I wanted to swim there. I wanted to walk those streets. I wanted to see what was going on. I wanted to go to the 4th of July parade. I wanted to go to each of those things because you painted it that it was there. And even if I really didn't want to stay in the Paper Palace overnight, and I might have gone to the hotel too, I still would have wanted to experience it. How's that? I wanted to at least touch it.
I think that's good. And it's interesting you mentioned the 4th of July scene and about editing, because that was one scene that came out of, in my writing group with Mark Sarvis, everybody kept saying, we need a piece in the more present between Gina and Elle. We just feel that's missing. We feel it's missing. So, okay. And I went away, and for the next thing, I brought in this scene that I thought was really good. And everybody responded, oh, we love this, and blah, 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 blah. But, and then Mark Sarvis said, I think it was really beautifully written, Miranda, but it was just throw it out and start again. It was a swing and a miss. And I went, okay. Yeah. And I went back, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I opened up the thing, and I started with July 4th. And so that's the big scene with Elle and Gina, really, even though it's not really with Elle and Gina, it's, it's between Gina and Jonas and Elle and all of those dynamics, but I needed to get the dynamics right.
Yeah. And who's where on the beach, and who's seeing what, and who can't see what. And those circumstances, it's dark. There's, we're waiting for the fireworks, we're waiting for whatever, but what's really happening, the fireworks behind the scenes, and what's there and what's not. And
yeah, exactly.
They're little mini firecrackers that are going off. I don't know, I'm doing big metaphors here, folks. This is more deep than usual for me. You know what I mean?
We enjoy metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. So you come from this very storied literary and artistic history. I mean, there's a lot, in your family. That posed a challenge to you as you were writing of like, well, we've got all this credence behind us. We've got all this artistic talent behind us. Or are you saying like, it's my turn, I'm just going to go do this?
Well, it's what prevented me from writing a novel until I was in my 50s. I will certainly say that. Mm. I didn't have confidence, and I knew that, and I was so concerned with, will it be good enough? I don't want to do something that would be crappy, or that would be compared, or that would fail, all of these things. Like I was talking about kind of, super ego, like just critical. I also should point out though that I come from a family of book editors. Mm-hmm. And so, those lessons about editing, and I myself was a book editor and magazine editor. So I was very used to being told what I was doing wrong in writing, but I myself do the same thing. Mm-hmm. I needed to get out of my own way. And it took me a very long time to do that. So 2 things I think happened to me. One is that I went back to writing a lot of poetry, and that really changed my approach. I'd written the beginning of the novel a long time ago and put it away. And it was so overly precise that I was like, oh, no, just you have to crack everything open. It has to be like poetry, right? And so that was definitely a piece of it, going back to the poetry and allowing sort of myself to not lead, but to follow, right? The strangeness or the, but also, I would have to admit too, that when I started writing it, I just thought, well, I'm never going to show it to anybody, you know, so no one cares. No one knows I'm writing this book. And, you know, and if I like it at the end, then, you know, then I'll show it to people. But I really didn't show it to anybody until it was a couple drafts in.
Wow. Wow. You know, it's funny because I remember you hearing you say that you've wrote a lot of poetry, and I feel like it influenced your prose writing. I definitely felt like, you know, that, because I felt that there were beautiful sentences, great descriptions, and where they needed type prose as a result, it completely worked. And I feel like in poetry, sometimes it's very terse. It's not super flowery. It's like, let's tell the story. Let's get the words out there. And so I felt it, you know, had a big influence. So let me just say, I saw that later.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, that it definitely did. And in fact, fun that, you know, there's certain little teeny pieces of poetry, of some of my poetry that actually ended up in the novel. So
yeah, it's all working there. You know, it's small side here. I'm notorious about folding down pages of a book when I know I want to interview the author. Notorious about doing this. And I looked at this book last night and I said, okay, where are my folded down pages? And I didn't have any. And that was really interesting to me because I was so absorbed in the book. So everything that I am saying here was from memory. And that's so different to me because, like, I didn't have to look up, like, her brother, her sister's boyfriend wanted to leave. I didn't have to look up what happened with Wallace. It was here. And it was because I was so absorbed when I was reading the book. And I literally finished reading the book and said, I really want to talk to her. And I remember walking in the house going, okay, which house is this? Who do I need to talk to? And what do I need to do? So
I love that.
That's pretty critical because really no mess. I can show you. It was the only copy I've got. Kind of incredible for me. I didn't even remember Post-its. I mean, really. Was the title always The Paper Palace? Was that always the title?
No, the very original title was Plasticity, which is a whole other conversation. I'm really glad I changed it. And that had to do with a sort of my original thinking of how I could tell this sort of John Lennon-ish story, which was about sort of the way painters look at painting. I have a lot of painters in my family, and sort of always an argument about sort of, you know, this thing called plasticity, you know, what's a good painting versus a bad painting to them.
Yeah.
Subjective. But, you know, they would say a bad painter goes, you know, goes to paint an apple and he paints what his brain thinks an apple looks like. A good painter never sees the apple. And so I thought, oh, well, that's a way in, right? Sort of that's, you know, like Cézanne's apple versus I don't know whose apple. And I thought, so at the very beginning when I was finding my way, that didn't last very long. Then it had no title at all. And then when I realized what I was doing, then the title came to me.
Yeah, no, it's perfect title because it's saying a lot. It's saying a lot about paper also falling apart and things that fall apart, and it just completely works. Then let's talk about the cover. If I remember correctly, it's the rendering of a painting. This is also a painting. Who did the painting?
My stepfather, Paul Resica, who's who's a amazing painter. He's 93 now. He's you know, been a very established painter in New York, but also on Cape Cod, since he's painted here a lot, and Provincetown is in the museum, and amazing painter. And actually, there's a huge book of his work, if you're ever interested, that Rizzoli published, and it's got it by generation. And it's a lot of it is of our pond, and this is a detail of a painting of our pond. And I didn't find this painting. The art director, you know, the art director found that particular painting. We were going to go with something different completely, and then she said she stumbled on it online that was really old, and she found it was an image from an old Sotheby's auction, and had to track it down.
Wow. And then you sit there and go, wait, I know that one. I mean, that must have been really, wait a second, that's my stepfather's painting. And all paintings.
That I knew. I mean, it said Paul, you know, it said Resica. And the minute I saw it, I was like, oh, that's Resica, of course.
But she's not knowing that. She's not knowing that.
No, she knows. She was looking at that point for Resicas.
Oh, okay.
Because we had started with something very different and we were looking at artwork. And then I said, well, P.S., my stepfather's a famous painter who paints Cape Cod. You might just want to take a look. I'm not going to give you a direction at all, but, and so she went off and found this painting that my mother didn't even know existed. And my mother has, is sort of curated and chronicled everything. So yeah, and I love that cover so much. I'm so happy.
It's just stunning. It's absolutely stunning. It's one of those pictures. It's art. It's art, folks. That's the reason it works. Yeah. It's just beautiful because it's artwork.
Yeah.
Okay. So the audiobook is narrated by Nan McNamara. Did you pick Nan to do the work? Did you pick her to do the audio, or did they bring that to you?
They brought me a very short list of choices, and Nan was all of our top pick for it, but it was a short list. Yeah. But they had come down to maybe, I think there were 2 or 3 people on it, 3 readers, and they were all really good in different ways, So for me, it was who could act, as opposed to necessarily the voice. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because that's a big part of it, is how are you going to be able to tell the story with the right emotion? How are you going to push your story for the right emotion? Because the inflection of a sentence or a word here would matter a lot of how you're going to interpret and be reading the book. It's because you're reading it for the reader. It's you're bringing it to, you're acting it for them.
Yeah, and it's hard because you have a conversation before the sort of the producer and the before Nan went off together to do it, and there was certain things we could talk about, or words that I said it's very important that these people do pronounce them this way instead of that way. In terms of character, but then that's it. And so listening to it, sometimes there's you're going no, and sometimes you're going yes, but you just have to. I feel like the book was mine until I put it out there in the world, and now it's everybody's. And so you have to kind of get out of the stickler for detail thing and go for what it feels like as a piece. And I think she did a beautiful job.
Yeah. So what are you hearing from readers? Do you hear a lot from readers when they're finishing the book? I bet people have opinions, many opinions.
Many opinions. Yeah, I hear a lot from readers, good and bad. Most people who are writing to me are writing good, but not everybody, I think there's been intense response from the positive, and probably too in terms of the only thing that seems to bother, and I get it, is that this is not a light beach read.
No.
I mean, it's a literary novel with something commercial about it, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of dark things that happen. That I wanted to examine and that I thought were seriously important. But for a lot of people, those things, or reading about any kind of trauma, is something that they, that's impossible for them for whatever personal reason. And so I think there are people that seems to be the one thing. It's kind of, I couldn't handle, this felt, yucky to me or whatever, and that's obviously everybody's different. So
I've had people that say I can't read a book about an affair, I can't read a book about divorce, I can't read a book about, it's more than the other kinds of things that are the triggers as well. It's interesting because I think these trigger warnings are bigger over the last decade than it was before everybody would just read the book. Now everybody has to have, this is the trigger warning, and I'm reading articles like in news articles, and they'll say, trigger warning about this, trigger warning, whatever. And we just didn't do that before. So I think that's, something that's, completely there that must be dealt with at this point in writing that we never dealt with before.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not that the writing should change at all, but I think, that is that thing of kind of why aren't there trigger warnings all over the place? And, that's not something that was in my control.
No,
I mean, no. I wrote the book I wrote, and some people really, of course, they don't want to read about child abuse or sexual abuse or spousal abuse or I don't know, I'm just throwing out horror stories, right?
Yeah.
And yet they're perfectly happy to read about, a slasher murder.
Well,
It's like
it's funny.
and everything, but it's like, something with the verisimilitude of it is going to bring up such a different experience depending also on one's own life experience.
Well,
So,
it's always funny because I think about everybody goes, oh, children must be protected, but I'm like, let's think about the Hunger Games. The kids were hunting each other and killing each other. What could be more violent than that? And that was like the most popular book. So let's just back it up for a second, about what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
So the book is being developed as a miniseries for HBO, and you are adapting it. So what is it like writing a screenplay? Like, I know, and you've got a storied history, which we'll get into for a second, at HBO, but like, what's it like now writing the book as a screenplay? Totally different.
Totally different. And I'd never written a screenplay. I mean, I was on the other side. So to be on this side, it's, not nearly as fun in a way. but I love writing dialogue. And so that part for me is very is deeply enjoyable, and being able to, and you have to create new ways of telling the same story, because it doesn't translate necessarily. And so that means I get to write a lot of new dialogue for Wallace, which is of course, a deep joy. That's been the most fun, I think. The pilot episode has been difficult to crack because of the structure of the book. And people who haven't read the book, who coming to a miniseries, need to, they need to feel, catchy and fast and all the things that they want on television. And so it's so keeping the sort of subtlety of tone, let's put it that way. I don't know how subtle, but the kind of the specificity of tone. And at the same time, kind of revving up the excitement, or propulsion is always their word. That's a challenge. Working through it. So.
And especially with what people are used to watching today. I mean, when you started, you were at HBO when it was The Sopranos, The Wire, these places that defined streaming. They defined series. They defined what we're looking for in cable. And when you think back about those moments, those shows have held up. Like, how well people, I know one of my kids was going, I think I'm going to watch The Sopranos, like the whole thing. And you're just there like, wow, like really, like at this point. Yeah. But visual storytelling is so different from written storytelling. And I interviewed Megan Abbott last week, who wrote The Turnout, and she'd written the script for Dare Me and she'd run the show besides writing the book. And she said, you just have to go to a different brain. We just have to flip your brain. And it's also, you have to write with more people. She said, there are more people commenting, more people sharing what's going on. Whereas before, when you were writing, you're by yourself. And then all of a sudden, everybody else has got to get involved. And it's like, wait a second, whoa. Can I just hold my story for a bit, Yeah.
Well, and I think also the huge difference, the enormous difference is in television, you can always be replaced. As a novelist, you can't be replaced.
Yeah, this is like, what's going on.
In TV, they're constantly going, we're doing, I've done it myself. I think the thing about things like The Sopranos and The Wire, where those were almost more like novels. And maybe and they're classics. And Game of Thrones clearly proves that people still want that. It's really in-depth, sort of slower storytelling. The Sopranos was The Wire. Those are, you have to sink into it and get engaged with it, and then you're along in this, in this novel, basically. Yeah. You put up on the screen. It's not sort of quick and sexy and episodic. The things that happen, but they're not. They happen in a very rich soup.
Well, it's also sometimes of a series, the penultimate episode is even better than the finale. Like that whole setup thing to get to the end. It's very funny because The Sopranos, we belonged to a swim club when we were growing up, and The Sopranos house is actually where the basketball court used to be in the swim club when we were growing up. And we were like, where's Tony's house? Oh my gosh, because it was in West Caldwell or North Caldwell, New Jersey. And it's like, we know exactly where that house is. So it's very, very funny. There's the Soprano house, basketball court was there before. So when you started this book, there were a few others with false starts in the drawer. After you work on the screenplay, you're going to pick one of those up, or is there something else you're going to write?
Definitely want to start writing another project. I think I'll start from, I think I've learned a lot from writing The Paper Palace. And so going backwards, is sort of pointless. I'd rather go forward now, having really gone through the experience of writing it, and take a new journey and not have any idea what I'm going to do. And I won't know until I start. And P.S. I didn't know with this one. And the very first line of The Paper Palace is things come from nowhere. That's where I started, literally.
Literally. Well, I'll tell you, I want you to back to the beach, go do some thinking after you write that screenplay. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do next, because I think this, for a debut novel in your 50s, I think that's like really empowering for a lot of women right now who sat there and said, I can't do this. I can't. And to have written something that was so good, so well put together. I think that also, if you'd written this in your 20s, you wouldn't have had the experience you needed to write this. And I think there's sometimes some books are being written before people are there where they need to be to write them.
Yeah, well, this book certainly I couldn't have, because it's about a life and the questions that we come to. And so, yeah, I couldn't have written it. I mean, I could have finished it sooner.
Well, life got in the way. I mean, like, look, life got in the way. But there are other things that you did, the writing of poetry, the doing of this, the experiencing, being up there another summer might have gotten you to someplace else, going and seeing things in different. And, you know, when you start writing a book, I think you see where you are, you see the pond, you see everything differently, because you're seeing it of how's it going to go on the page before just how I'm seeing it here. How am I going to write it, you know?
Yeah, and I wanted it to be the stage set. It's interesting for me. I wanted the stage sets to be very familiar to me and sort of comforting to me, and then that gave me the freedom to create a completely, you know, wonderful fiction, because I had my main character already in a certain way, or, you know, my second lead, which was the place itself. So yeah.
This was going to be, who's going to be, and then you get to cast, and then you get to do all these other things that, and I never ask people like, who do you see? I mean, so many people ask that as their question, and I'm like, who knows who's going to be available? Let's get really real here on what goes on, especially after COVID. Like, everybody goes, so-and-so is going to star. And I'm like, there are like 12 things that person's supposed to do, and they did none for the last 20 months. So now what are we going to do? Like, how is it going to happen? So I think it's like, you know, roll with the flow. Well, I thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed the book so much, and it's fun to talk to somebody when you feel that way.
I love talking to you, and thank you for loving the book.
Thanks. And to our readers, look forward to seeing you next time on Book Reporter Talks to.